In this video, we'll be diving into what comps are when you're buying real estate or selling real estate and what that means for you as a buyer and what that means for you as a seller. With that, let's dive right into the content. My name is William Singh. I'm a local real estate agent here in Portland, Oregon. And if you like any of this content, feel free to like and subscribe. It would mean a lot to me. And if you have any questions whatsoever, feel free to leave a comment down below. Whenever you hear comps, that is synonymous with a CMA, which is a comparative market analysis, or when you comp a property, you're essentially looking at properties around that property that are similar to it that have sold recently. Now, comps are very important also for anyone who's looking to flip a home, and is good to know what the comps are in the area, especially of what that after repair value would be. So that way you're not making your property too fancy.
I want to be fancy.
Comparatively to the other homes around it. So that way you want to make sure that those comps are supported, or that after repair value is supported when you do all those renovations. So to define what a comp is, it is essentially an estimate of what the value of the home is. Now, this is one of those things that can kind of vary from place to place and how things are done or how that process goes, but essentially it's an estimate to determine what the value is. Now, how this is important for buyers is when you're looking at buying a home, an agent should be creating a comp for that property. So that way you know what to be using in your offer, or how much your purchase price should be for that offer. And then also for sellers, this is a great way for you to understand how to position your listing, whether or not you're going to be on the lower end of that spectrum or on the higher end of that spectrum. And again, this is where you have a real estate agent that kind of helps coach and guide you through all of this and understands where you're at and what the situation is. So one of the things that people typically do is they'll go on Zillow and they'll see the Zestimate for a home. Now, this is something that is a decent guidepost, but something where you also want to have a little bit more deep dive. And the reason being is that the Zestimate doesn't always account for the finishes of a home or the location as accurately as it should. Now, the reason for this is because sometimes it can't define the difference between being straight on a busy street and being a couple doors back. Now, not to say that Zestimates are completely worthless, but it's something to just note that if you're wanting a more accurate understanding of what the value of the home is, it does require a little bit more homework and sometimes a little bit more of a human perspective to really see what the value of it could be. So a question that does get asked is, how do you even comp a property? Now, this is something that you can do by yourself, but one of those things, if you have an agent who is very familiar with the market and understands how to comp properties, something that is a little bit of an art as well. So always rely on them as your professional, but you can do this by yourself. But these are some factors that we are looking at when we are creating comps for a property. Now, when it comes to comps, typically we're going to be looking at 5 to 10 properties that are around that area, and there are a couple factors that go into this. One is going to be finding subject properties around there that are going to be similar in the sense of having similar amenities. So this is one of those things where if you're looking at a bathroom or a kitchen, you're going to want to look at the finishes of those kitchens and see if they have a little bit more of a modern finish to them, or maybe less of a modern finish of them, and kind of keep that in mind when you are looking at the value. So a more modern finish might attract more buyers and thus increase the value of that home. Some other things that we are looking at is going to be square footage. This is something where if you have more square footage, typically you're going to be able to get a little bit more for the house. Now, we're also looking at bedrooms, bathrooms, and how many are in the subject property versus the other comparables that are in that area. Sometimes you can find properties that are going to be similar, but you have to subtract that extra bedroom or bathroom to kind of make up or add to the value of the home. In terms of location, this is one of those things where we are usually looking in about a 1 mile radius of that subject property. Now, this is something that can change from place to place, especially with multifamily. If there's not a lot of comps in the area, you do have to kind of stretch that out a little bit more, and is kind of variable to certain neighborhoods as well. So just kind of keep that in mind, that it is a general rule of thumb, but not always the case of needing to stay within that 1 mile radius. Some other factors you're looking at when you're looking at other comparable properties is what the status of that property is. If you have an active listing, that is a good idea to kind of see where that property lays with that other property, but it's not always the best because you don't know what will kind of happen with that, whether a buyer would buy it or they don't, or whether or not it will come in at that list price or not. So typically one of the less reliable comps to be using. Now, pending, on the other hand, is something that is a little bit more helpful because then you do know how long it was sitting on the market and then also what price it was at, and you can have a better gauge. But the best out of all those three is going to be sold data. Now, this is something where you know what the terms are. Typically, you know what the final purchase price is, and you'll be able to have a better understanding of what that comp was. Now, again, this kind of brings up the fact of that in the market that's shifting, it's always something that's a little bit of a moving target, which makes it so that way doing these comps is, again, a little bit of a science and a little bit of an art as well. Another factor that we're looking at is days on market. Now, this is a factor that does kind of play a role and kind of depends on whether or not it's pending, active, or sold, and is one of those things that if you're looking to sell a property, for example, you're going to be wanting to look at other properties that have maybe been active and compare that to yours and say, hey, if it has a very high days on market and it's a fairly comparable property and you want to sell that property a lot sooner, it might be more advantageous for you to have a little bit lower price. Now, this is again one of the ways that we're looking at the comps and also just determining what the factors are for determining those comps as well, along with making sure that it aligns with your strategy. Now, with all these different factors, some things to know is that if you're looking to get the best bang for your buck or biggest ROI, then one of the things to be looking at is as sellers looking at renovating kitchens, bathrooms, and doing paint. Those are going to typically provide you the most return on value. And again, obviously this depends on the cost of construction and things of that nature. But if you're wanting to improve the value of your home, then that is definitely something to keep in mind. Now, there are always caveats with this. This is one of those things where when you're doing comps, sometimes you would need to expand the search and expand the area, and sometimes you have to go back further to understand where the value of this might be. For example, land is something where typically there's not a ton of it available, and you have to look maybe further out to 2 years to see what those comps are, and then also judge where the economic conditions are, what the sellers were doing at that time. There's a lot more factors into this, which makes that part more of an art. And this is where when you have an experienced agent who's able to really look at those comps and figure out what the value of that home is, that's where they kind of help and provide that value for you. If you are finding any of this content helpful and you're better understanding what comps are, then it would be awesome if you could hit that like button and then also subscribe if you feel like getting more content from me. With that, let's dive into where comps play a factor in the process of buying a home. When you're in the process of buying a home, typically the agent, your buyer's agent, will be creating comps before you put an offer on a place. Now, this is something where you will use those comps to better inform your offer strategy and what you're going to be asking for. The second part where comps usually come in is when appraisers enter the equation. So once you've gotten through the initial offer, that's gotten accepted, and now you are in the process of getting the appraisal done. This is where an appraisal will come in, and typically they'll find 3 comps, and they will then do the appraisal, and with that they then determine the value to then give back to the bank of, hey, the value of this home is X, or the value of this home is Y. So this is where the second time where comps kind of come into factor, but it's through the appraiser. Those are 2 of the major points where comps are used. Now, this is one of those things where in rising markets, you're going to see those comps usually come in a little bit low. And then as markets start declining, you'll actually see those comps come in a little bit higher. So just one of those things to kind of keep in mind when you are in the home buying process. Now, let's dive right into how this factors in when you are selling a home. Now, when it comes to selling a home, one of the major factors that come into play is what is your strategy and what is going to meet your needs. So usually you're going to be given some sort of range and saying, hey, as a listing agent, I recommend if you want to sell very quickly, then we are in this price range. If you want to have kind of a little bit more time on the market, or you're wanting to wait and to have this value, then you might have to be waiting on the market a little bit longer. Then you can go for this higher value. And now there's the kind of in between where you are finding that right balance between waiting for the right buyer and also being able to get the price that you want that's maybe a little bit higher. Now, this is one of those things where it depends on the market, it depends on the economic factors, it depends on a variety of different things, but just know that you're going to need to talk to your agents to really go through all of the potential options you have and figure out what's going to be the best strategy for you. This is typically where you're going to be using comps the most, and is something to just kind of keep in mind. So if you're wanting to maybe stay in that house for a shorter period of time, then you're going to want to maybe price a little bit more aggressively. And if you're okay with staying in that home for a longer period of time, then you can have that price be a little bit higher. Now, this also kind of pertains to land, because land typically will stay on the market for quite a while because they're okay with the price that it is and is willing to kind of wait out that time. So just something to kind of keep in mind. And that is a good gist of what comps are. And if you have any questions whatsoever, feel free to reach out. I would love to help you out. And if you want to leave any comments below with any questions, feel free to do that as well. If you found any of this content helpful and you feel like you got a deep dive into comps, it would be great if you could like and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching.